Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, May the 2nd, 2025. In this video, I want to do a quick update on Nigel Farage, the British politician, the head of a Reform Party, who is getting a huge amount of publicity because his party is doing well. Now, there are or were elections on Thursday. I'm making this recording on a Thursday, so I don't know the results of those elections, but I'm kind of making the assumption that the profile of reform is going to increase as a result of these elections on Thursday, May the 1st. But I'm not really going to be talking about the elections in detail. I really want to focus on Nigel Farage and just give an update on what's going on in his life. But before I talk about Nigel Farage, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, May the 2nd, 2025. So here are the positions of the planets, and the moon is still in Cancer at noon on Friday, May the 2nd. Moon is at 19 Cancer. It is making a sextile to the Sun, and it's making a square to Mercury. So Moon sextile Sun, Moon is in Taurus, Sun is in Cancer. Now, these are two signs that have a fairly easy relationship to one another. So, that sextile should mean that it can be an okay day, especially at the beginning of the day, especially if you're in Asia or Australia or New Zealand when that Moon sextile the Sun is, possibly going to be stronger. And additionally, we have Moon sextile Mercury. Now, that aspect between the Moon and Mercury is brief, but when the two communication planets are in square, there may be a misunderstanding. Moon in Cancer is looking for stability and security, and it's square Mercury in Aries. People saying things that upset us, or upset our stability, or maybe it's us saying the words. We say something, we just feel it's got to be said, but the reaction might be not quite what we expect. And additionally, we have Venus conjunct Neptune. You could say that Venus conjunct Neptune is the main aspect of the day. And with that Venus conjunct Neptune, it may just be about Neptune. I mean, Venus is just triggering Neptune, and we get a real blast of what Neptune in Aries is all about. Neptune in Aries is about people looking for leadership. That's what people really want, I think, with Neptune in Aries. I've talked about what I think about Neptune moving into Aries between now and the late 2030s. I know it briefly goes back into Pisces at the end of the year, but it's quite brief, just for a couple of months, I think. But, with Neptune and Aries, people are looking for a direction. And Venus conjunct Neptune, it may be just a time when those who are able to lead are the ones who get the attention. That may be one interpretation of Venus conjunct Neptune, but I'm very much focusing on Neptune, and it's perhaps more of a collective interpretation. Venus conjunct Neptune on a more personal level can be about confusion and deception, and our feelings could get mixed up, getting the wrong impression about people. That is a classic Venus conjunct Neptune interpretation. And also Venus conjunct Neptune, you could say, with Venus being in its detriment, perhaps being too forward because you think you understand the situation, but because it's conjunct Venus is conjunct Neptune, maybe you don't actually know what's going on. So in your social life and in your dealings with other people, tread carefully and don't assume that you understand what's going on in another person's mind, in another person's heart. And there is something a little bit deceptive about that conjunction between Venus and Neptune. So, those are the main things going on today, at least from a sort of geocentric perspective, looking at the main aspects. You could notice also that Mercury is aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So here's Mars. Where's Saturn gone? Here's Mars and here's Saturn. And Mercury's making a semi-square to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So, the question is, what exactly does that mean? I don't know if you can see that, but there's Mercury tree, and there's Mercury on aspecting by semi-square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so Mercury is about the way we think, and could be about the things we say. But some of us may feel with this Mercury making a semi-square to the Mars-Saturn midpoint that there's a certain gloom in the air, that we are looking at things in a maybe quite a negative way. And also the things people say might be a little upsetting. They're reminding us that things aren't great. And we shouldn't take what people say too seriously. But sometimes we just have to accept reality. And if things aren't going great, again, it's not necessarily just for us. It's just, for the world at large. We just need to accept the situation. So there could be a little bit of pessimism in the air with that Mercury making that semi-square to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And from the perspective of Australasia, if we set the chart for Sydney rather than for New York, so if you are in East Asia, if you're in East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the moon is earlier in the sign. And as I was suggesting, the moon is making a sextile to the sun. So a pretty exact sextile to the sun at around lunchtime. So if you are in Australasia, I would think that probably a more harmonious day than if you're in the Americas. If you're in the Americas, you might have to deal with a moon square Mercury. But that moon square Mercury, if you're in Australasia, is not really going to cut in until pretty late in the day. So if you are in Australasia, use that moon sextile sun. Moon in Cancer, sextile sun in Taurus can be reassuring, and things can work well, and it might be just a good day for just harmonizing with everything. And then there is the heliocentric picture, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and probably the main heliocentric aspect is a conjunction between Mercury and Pluto. Now, these kind of aspects like Mercury, Pluto, particularly those involving Mercury, they do happen quite regularly, because heliocentrically, Mercury only takes 88 days to go around the sun. So in a heliocentric chart, Mercury is kind of a bit like the moon, not because it's means the same thing, but then in a geocentric chart, the moon is the planet or the satellite that's just moving quickly. In the heliocentric chart, there's no moon because the moon is in the same place as the Earth, but Mercury is a fast mover, and Mercury is making a conjunction to Pluto, and so that probably sort of emphasizes the Pluto principle, and that might mean that some people have got serious things to say, other people are finding it difficult to say anything, and words do have meaning, and words can be a means by which we can exert a degree of control. And so also think about what people are saying on the global scene. Everyone's trying to have an influence, aren't they? Politicians, alliances, so many things going on in the world now, and verbal posturing. So that might be a way in which Mercury conjunct Pluto works. So those are a few thoughts about the general picture today, astrologically. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, May the 2nd, 2025. Aries. Aries, you know how to present yourself. You can just be charismatic and pleasant, and perhaps you can be all things to all people. Now, that is not a typical Aries approach. Aries has a reputation for being very definite, and that is really a hallmark of your sign. But today, with Venus making a conjunction to Neptune at the beginning of Aries, you can play games a little bit. You can be one thing to one person, another thing to another person, and it will come to you through relatively easily. And I think that's fine, provided you realize that you are in a role, and role as in ROLE, as in acting a role. And so provided you realize that, and that you have to get out of role at some stage, because of course if you play a part for too long, it might be assumed that you are the part. So don't get too caught up into the image you are presenting. And at a certain stage, you will have to reveal your true self. But for the moment, you can play games, and you can, to an extent, disguise yourself. And that might actually be something you want to do from a psychological perspective. Again, I don't think that it's a typically Aries day. I think part of you is feeling that you need your security. You don't want to reveal yourself, or at least you don't want to reveal yourself in your full glory, because if you do, or if you were to, then that might lead to certain risks, and things might happen that you weren't expecting. And I do think that there are certain things you want to keep secret, and given that, then you can see why you want to be someone else and pretend to be someone else. It's not a conscious process, though. It's just something very natural. Though, just don't take it too far. And most importantly, whatever you need to keep hidden, you'll be able to keep it hidden. And this does have implications for relationships, because getting on with people, I do think, is going to be easy. And sometimes Aries has a problem, but they're too abrupt. They're too much themselves. But you can, as I've already suggested, you can keep things secret, and you can just be quite sort of flowing and sympathetic, and you can listen to what people say, and you can tell them what they want to hear, and you're not necessarily going to talk too much, because you're going to allow people to be themselves. And this approach is going to make relationships easier, even with people you haven't necessarily got on well with in the past. You now have an opportunity to perhaps build bridges. And additionally, with Venus moving through the first couple of degrees of Aries, it might mean that someone new is turning up on the scene, or is on the scene, and they like you, or they could like you, if you give them the chance, because there's something about you that right now is rather compelling. So that does look good for relationships. To really try to make the most of relationships. If that is what you want. Though there are things going on under the surface. You're not revealing everything. And, one thing you may not be revealing is, your own ideas, because your mind is kind of working in overdrive right now. And it has been for a few days. And you're having a lot of ideas, and you can express these ideas if you want to, if you feel the situation is right, and if you do express these ideas, which some of them which could be exciting and dramatic, you could have an impact. But in many cases, you're just going to want to keep these things to yourself, because you haven't quite worked out where it's all going. So that's it, Aries. I think that it looks like being a day when you're able to get on with people very well, and it's maybe not a typically Aries day, but that's good. Sometimes you need a break, and sometimes you do need to keep things to yourself. Taurus, there is a conjunction between Venus and Neptune, and I talked about that Venus-Neptune conjunction yesterday, and today this Venus-Neptune conjunction is exact, and inevitably that must have an impact on you. Quite what that impact is and whether it's good or bad may depend on you. So if you are trying to be very definite, and you want to be out there in the world, and you want to be making things happen, and you want to be at the center of things, then this Venus-Neptune conjunction may be a bit of a problem. It may encourage you to make mistakes. You might not understand what's going on. You might reach conclusions. I mean, Venus in Aries is about reaching conclusions. Venus, your ruler in Aries, you want to be perhaps a little bit abrupt, and you want to be definite, and it's always good to reach conclusions. But then if you act on these conclusions, then you might get it wrong, and you might do things that you later regret. Now, that's one scenario. It doesn't have to be like that. What you need to be doing is you need to be a little more circumspect. You need to bide your time. And the Venus-Neptune conjunction should be about contemplation, trying to understand what's going on, and being aware of what you don't know. That is a key point, isn't it? They always say, if you don't know what you don't know, you're in real trouble. If you do know what you don't know, then it's not so bad. And I certainly found that for a sort of long time when I was in America, I found myself tutoring statistics, and statistics. I'm not a great mathematician, not really, but I was tutoring statistics, and the key thing about tutoring statistics is knowing what you don't know. And if you know what you don't know, then you're not going to make a complete fool of yourself, and it gives you a chance to prepare, and then you can kind of just fill in the gaps, and so you can kind of get away with it. But if you don't know what you don't know, and you're claiming some expertise that you don't have, it can be seriously embarrassing, trust me. Well, you know that as well. So if you are aware of your own ignorance, and not that you're ignorant, just being aware, we're all ignorant. Just remember, I've got Taurus rising as well. So I've got. Okay, maybe you're coming to this reading with your sun in Taurus, or even the moon in Taurus, but I've got my ascendant in Taurus, so I'm maybe to an extent talking to myself. But you do need to be aware of where those gaps are, and if you feel certain about something, just flow with it. It may just be a passing phase, this certainty. And, additionally with Venus conjunct Neptune, you may be able to sort of tune into something beyond yourself. It is a very spiritual combination. Venus and Neptune, and particularly if you're a Taurus. And so you may feel sort of more sensitive, and perhaps at a certain point you might feel quite inspired, and it starts to make sense. But still, there's no need to draw conclusions. You just wait it out. It just will take. It will take a few days before things really start to manifest. And I must emphasize, it is not a time for taking dramatic initiatives. I think you will be tempted to do something that you hadn't prepared, you hadn't planned. That it's quite impulsive. You're tempted to do it. You think you know what you're doing, and if you go ahead, then there's a good chance that you may, at best, be disappointed. At worst, come a cropper. So, don't be impulsive today, Taurus. I think that is important, and it is better if you just do very little, and you just stay where you are. You can interact with other people, but in a very sort of gentle way. In fact, your communication skills are actually going to be excellent, especially if you're in Australia and New Zealand, because in Australia and New Zealand you feel the full power of a sextile between the moon and the sun. If you're in the Americas or Europe, you still have that sextile, but the moon is also making a square to Mercury. So you might say something without thinking about it, and it could embarrass yourself if you're not careful. But again, it's unnecessary. In general, it's a day for responding rather than acting. Gemini, you feel that not everything is right. Remember, I'm a Gemini. I've got my sun in Gemini, and there's something bothering you, maybe, or there's something you're perhaps obsessing about, and there may be a certain tendency to assume the worst, to feel that things aren't as they should be, and if you've tried at something, you've really tried to get something to work, and it hasn't worked, there's a danger that you just give up, or you assume that it just cannot be done, and there could then be a feeling through the day of actual sort of frustration. It's just not happening, and the question is, what do you do about it? And sometimes there is an argument for giving up. If something isn't working, well, why persist with it? On the other hand, you don't want to convince yourself that something is hopeless through the sort of negative sort of cognitive feedback loop, and you assume that everything is hopeless. At the first sign that something is wrong, you just give up. And so you don't want to do that. But you've got to be realistic, and you've got to get the balance right. And so try to be open-minded, and perhaps you can get some outside advice or find something on the internet. Keep working at finding solutions, but don't work on it too long, so that otherwise you might just really have a very frustrating day. And I should also say, your thoughts could be going in strange ways, and you could be thinking about worst possible scenarios. You could be thinking about death and destruction, as Gemini sometimes do. At least this Gemini sometimes does. Quite a lot. For me, I think about death a lot. And there's something about death, but that's just me. So I don't want to project. So you try to be a little bit positive. You don't want to be crazy positive, but it might be worth your while. And also don't allow financial issues to get you down. And is possible that you might, because the moon is square Mercury. That's especially the case in the Americas and Europe, not so much in Australia or New Zealand. But yeah, so financial issues might get you down, and you might keep coming back to money, and it might just be difficult to relax. And so, what do you do? Well, if you constantly thinking about money and for no reason, well, what is the point? Maybe you should be looking for some kind of resolution. Find the answers. Maybe you actually don't want to know the answers. And so because you don't want to know the answers, you keep yourself in suspense, and that's not a position that you really want to be. So Gemini, I think that it could be a difficult day. And I think it could be a difficult day because you make it a difficult day through your own mind and your own perceptions. And, to end on something positive, don't forget, Gemini, that Mercury is starting to move towards a sextile with Jupiter. Jupiter's moving through your sign. It's a very positive influence. And, Mercury making this sextile to Jupiter, you're just beginning to feel it. It's about 4 degrees off, and I'm quite conservative in terms of of how I look at sextiles. I think you should use quite tight orbs. I regard 4 degrees, unless it's a horary chart, I regard 4 degrees as the absolute limits of the influence of a sextile. But Mercury's getting closer to sextile Jupiter, and I think you're going to feel better about yourself. And also this Mercury sextile Jupiter may improve relations with other people. You might have more to say, and you can perhaps find ways of interacting with certain people that you just hadn't found before. So that Mercury sextile Jupiter is something to look forward to, and perhaps you're just starting to feel its influence. So if you do feel negative, try to think beyond that negativity and see and realize that something is changing, and things are going to get better. Cancer, you actually have quite a lot of energy at the moment, and part of it is because the moon is in Cancer, and the moon is your ruler is in Cancer, which is the sign of its rulership. And additionally, if we look at the position of the moon, so we've got moon in Cancer, and we've got Jupiter in Gemini, we've got Jupiter in Gemini, which is the sign before Cancer, and we've got Mars in Leo, which is the sign just following Cancer. So you could argue that moon is sort of on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, and so Cancer, you may feel at the moment, I think you perhaps are feeling it a little bit yesterday as well, but you're feeling that you can make things happen, and I think that you're sort of more energized than you have been of late. And this energy doesn't have to be over the top. It doesn't have to be expressed in such a way that everyone notices it and worries, what's up with Cancer. It's not like that. I think that in your own way, you can just get going on things, and in the process, I think you're going to be able to really cover a lot of ground. And the moon in Cancer does make a sextile to the sun. And so moon in Cancer, sun in Taurus. Sun, Taurus, Cancer. These are two signs that really have a good understanding of each other. And with the moon sextile with sun, then you're feeling that you're in the right place. And that's especially true if you're in Australia or New Zealand, where that sextile with sun is pretty exact around lunchtime. It may be not quite such a factor if you're in the Americas, but you can still feel happy where you are, and also happy with whoever is around you. And so that does look good. Now, the moon, having made that sextile to the sun, it makes a square to Mercury. And certainly if you're in the Americas, that moon square Mercury is going to be quite important for you. And that moon square Mercury is challenging, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually quite motivating. And now this moon square Mercury is an aspect which is about communication, because as I always say, Moon and Mercury are the two planets of communication. The Moon is, you communicate from the heart, and with Mercury you communicate with the mind. And with this Moon square Mercury in important angles of your chart, Moon in Cancer, Mercury in Aries, you are going to know how to communicate, and there'll be things that you really feel you have to say. And other people are having issues with communication because they don't really know how to handle this Moon square Mercury. I think you actually do know how to handle it, and you are challenged to tell people what you feel, but you do it in such a way that it doesn't cause total chaos. And I think people in the end will really understand who you are and what you want, and perhaps they'll also understand what's bothering you. And Cancer, if you have any position of authority or leadership, then I think this Moon square Mercury could be really useful. I think that people will get what you're trying to say, and in most cases, they'll do what they're told. And another aspect we've got today is a conjunction between Venus and Neptune. Now, this Venus and Neptune may say something about the way you present yourself, and I think that you can present yourself very well. It may say something about what you're wearing, what you choose to wear, or at least how people perceive you. And you can come over as someone who is attractive, but who also means business. And so again, if you're trying to get people to notice you, and if you're trying to get people to follow your lead with this Venus conjunct Neptune, I think you very much can do it. And that Venus conjunct Neptune may sort of soften your approach. It may allow you to come over in a way that is not too challenging, is not too assertive, but still you are able to make sure that your opinions are heard. So that Venus Neptune conjunction, it could work in many different ways. It said it doesn't have to be about work. It can be about just presentation, and there's something about your presentation which can be quite impressive, and that's certainly going to help in terms of how you deal with other people. Whether it's on a group level or whether it's one-to-one. Whether there are particular people you're trying to impress. I think that's something you can do with that Venus Neptune conjunction. Leo, you don't have to always be in the center of things, and it's if you're feeling that you want to be in the center of things, you have to ask why. I mean, what actually are you trying to achieve? Sometimes if you are right in the middle of everything, it can be difficult. It can be exhausting. And Leo, that is something you don't need. And at the moment, it's quite possible that other people are a bit of a drain, and they might even be disappointing. So you might have ideas about what you want from the world, from your friends, other people you come across, but people are going to be disappointing. So that is a good reason not to have a super sociable day. You might like to, it might feel like being the right thing to do, but if you spend time socializing or a lot of time in people's company for whatever reason, something is being held back, and it may all be a little bit depressing. So a better approach would be to enjoy your own company. You're not going to depress yourself. You're fine, on your own. And you're actually going to be helped by the fact that there's a sextile between the moon and the sun. I mean, all of us can experience this moon sextile sun, though I think it's going to be especially strong if you're in Australasia. But that moon sextile sun is just an easygoing aspect, Leo, and it allows you to do things in your own way, and you can do important things in your own way, at your own pace. Even things which are connected with your ambitions. You can pursue your ambitions, but it's not a social activity. It doesn't have to be a social activity. It just could be maybe about just understanding things that other people don't get, maybe doing some research, doing things in a quiet way that doesn't need a huge amount of attention. Now, the main aspect today probably is a conjunction between Venus and Neptune, and that Venus conjunct Neptune, it further emphasizes the point that you don't have to be in the center of things. Absolutely not. I mean, you need really at the moment to be in exploration mode. And the thing about exploration mode is that you are open-minded and you're not making commitments and you're not taking rash initiatives, because you know that you're still working things out, and it's still a time when you can be inspired. And if you're inspired, you just have to just let it happen. And there are new things to discover. Now, these new things to discover at the moment, are very up in the air. At a later stage, not now, but maybe in a few weeks' time, maybe next month, these things that you're coming across could turn out to be very useful. And you may look at them again in a more practical and grounded way, but you don't have to do that right now. Right now, if you're in exploration mode, you just have to, just look at things, move on from one thing to another. You don't have to be set in your ways. You don't have to commit to any plan of action. Just be experimental. And what you don't want to do is reach conclusions. If you are reaching any conclusions today, especially about important matters, for example, about your direction in life, if you reach conclusions today, then I think there's a good chance that you might reach the wrong conclusion. But, don't worry, just don't reach conclusions and you'll be fine. Virgo, you are trying your best to be positive, and you can be successful to some extent in coming across as being a happy, forward-looking kind of person. And if you're with other people, you'll create a reasonably good impression. But there comes a point where you feel that you're perhaps in the wrong place, or you're doing the wrong things, or maybe it's other people doing the wrong things. And it just could be a question of having one thought too many. But, can you have one thought too many? Well, possibly not. You've got to keep your mind going. You've got to keep analysing. And it just may be, but when you look at something for the first time, it looks good. But when you look at it again and again and again, you realise that actually it's completely flawed. And it's not just things you might be looking at, it might be people. And that would be the problem of having a super sociable Friday. I mean, you might like to have a super sociable Friday, but if you spend time with other people, inevitably you start to see the problems. You start to see people's flaws. And the question is, what do you do about it? One approach is that you might say something about it. You might feel that you have to be critical. And that criticism starts in your own mind, but then it sort of seeps out and you say things which other people might misconstrue. I mean, some people don't like being criticized. And so I think that you should, if possible, have a reasonably busy social life, but don't take it too seriously and realize that things could get you down. Yeah, people could get you down. And the reason might just be analysis. You analyze the situation and you just reach conclusions that are not entirely positive. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. And if we take this further, then you might reach a situation where a bit of negativity becomes a lot of negativity, and you start to see things as maybe being hopeless. Now, I should explain why I'm saying this. So if you remember, right at the beginning of this video, or at the beginning when I was introducing the positions of the planets, I did point out that Mercury is making a semi-square to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so, this semi-square it might sound obscure, but I mean, I take it quite seriously. And so you can see what I mean, by the way, if I just do the 90-degree dial on Mercury. So if we look at the 90-degree dial for Mercury, and we put Mercury on the pointer, and you can see there is Mars and there's Saturn, so Mercury's on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Mercury is a fast mover. I must make that clear. So this is not something that's going to last long. So I mean, I wouldn't worry about it too much, but it just may say something about your perceptions. And it's not just about being a little bit negative. You might reach a stage where things look as if they're about to go really wrong, and it just may be about your environment and what you see with your own eyes. You see things and it just is absolutely obvious that it's not working well, and you can see the beginnings of some kind of disaster. Again, this is not necessarily your disaster, it's just the disaster around you, other people's disaster, society's disaster. But I must emphasize, this is a short move. This is a short move, a short-lived aspect, and I'm not trying to worry you. In fact, I'm saying to you, if you do feel negative today, then you can say to yourself, well, that's just Mercury semi-square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It will pass. And it will pass pretty quickly, because Mercury is moving quickly. And and additionally, from a heliocentric viewpoint, Mercury is making a conjunction to Pluto, and that Mercury conjunct Pluto may actually work in your favor. I mean, Mercury conjunct Pluto does allow you, Virgo, to really get deeply, deeply into things, and you can understand things through your concentration. You concentrate really hard, and it starts to make sense. And additionally, it could be also about how you present yourself and what you say, and your words can have an impact. You don't have to say many words, just enough. So if you feel that something has to be said and you say it, then straight away there is a lasting impact. Now, is that something you want? Well, don't say what's on your mind unless it's important. Some things you can just let them pass. I said at the beginning of this piece with moon sextile Mercury, you can be quite critical, but you don't want to overdo that criticality, and you don't want to be critical, just for the sake of it. Libra. So Libra, Venus is now very much in Aries, and Venus is, of course, your ruler, and Venus is making a conjunction to Neptune, and this Venus conjunct Neptune just may say something about you and the fact that you may be feeling a little more sensitive than usual, and it could relate to your psychic abilities. So if you have psychic abilities, then those psychic abilities are quite possibly going to be more pronounced than usual, and that can be about sort of telepathy. I don't think we're talking about what are we talking about? What's the word? Is it what's it when you can actually move things with your mind? I read this book in the 70s. The 70s was a great time for conspiracy theories and really weird ideas. It was like with the von Daniken books about aliens visiting the world. But there was a book I read about Soviet experiments on, I think it's telekinesis, isn't it? On moving things, and they gave examples of some Soviet research center where they concentrated on people who could actually move things with their mind and could actually use their psychic powers to scan American bases, for example, or indeed they could kill people with their minds. They could just stop their heart just by having the right thought or the wrong thought. And so we don't want to exaggerate this with Venus conjunct Neptune. Telepathy is kind of more reasonable, isn't it? And so your ability to read people's minds is probably pretty good. To read people's hearts, but there's always a problem there, isn't there? That with Venus conjunct Neptune, it's something of a two-edged sword. Yes, you might have psychic abilities, or your psychic abilities might be stronger than usual, but with Neptune, there is always a danger that you could be overwhelmed. You might pick up on too much, and it might be difficult for you to work out what is what. And so, just because you have a strong feeling that someone is thinking something, or that someone is about to do something, or indeed that something is about to happen, just because you have a strong feeling, you have to ask yourself, what is the basis of that feeling, and what is the signal, and what is the noise? That is really the problem about being a psychic. It's about distinguishing the two. There's a lot of noise, but you have to find the signal, and so that's perhaps what you should be trying to do. And so that is one aspect of today. And other people could make things more complicated than they need be, because this Venus-Neptune conjunction is taking place in Aries, your opposite sign, and so yes, that gives you an ability to read people's minds, but it also creates a possibility of you being completely confused by what other people are doing and by what people are saying. So maybe in that kind of situation, you don't want to be too close to the object of your inquiry or the person of your inquiry. Because if you get too close, you might just be completely blown apart by whatever they're emanating, whatever their thoughts, their feelings, everything. So yeah, a bit of distance is going to allow you to be more accurate in terms of, you know, the way you perceive others. And additionally, don't take what people say too seriously, because people's thoughts and their pronouncements, they may sound very impressive, but they could easily undermine you and they could distract you. You know, you might think that you know where you're going, you've got a clear path for yourself, but then someone says something and you think, oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe you need to take that into consideration. And if you do take what people say into consideration excessively, then you might end up getting nowhere. And so that's another reason, Libra, why today you need a certain amount of distance. And one other thing, Libra, you know, be very careful about doing things that just suddenly come to your mind. You just want to act on impulse, and that could happen. But if you do act on impulse today, then it might go wrong, because today there is something about you that is a little bit accident prone. And so if you do something dangerous, something you've never done before, or you're not concentrating, or you do something while you're feeling angry for whatever reason, there could be moments of anger today or frustration, and you feel you want to make something happen. So if you are feeling that, then, you know, be careful and get a bit of objectivity. And so, you know, there's nothing that you have to do today, and if you bear that in mind, I think you should be okay. Scorpio, you are not entirely content, you know, with the way things are, and you're always sort of looking for something more. And yeah, that's good. I mean, it's important not to be complacent and not to feel that, you know, you've got all the answers. Clearly, you haven't got all the answers. No one's got all the answers, and you certainly haven't got all the answers. And if you haven't got all the answers, then that's fine. It is a time to be looking at new horizons and asking questions, and if something seems unusual, you know, don't be threatened by it. You know, okay, at first sight, it might seem to be a threat, but if you have another look at it and you ask questions, you might see things in a different way, and you might realize that you're being given an opportunity. So, you know, keep moving, and, you know, don't create fixed plans for yourself, because the problem about creating fixed plans and feeling that you've got everything sorted out is that you are limiting yourself, and that's not what you want. You always have to have the possibility of something else coming in, of being able to take into account something new. So it's very important, Scorpio, that you don't close your doors on anything. And that's not just about things coming from the outside, you know, for example, people saying things. It might be about your own mind. You know, your mind is busy at the moment, and it's coming up with all sorts of ideas. And so if you think you've got a solution, then you might have one more idea, and you have one more idea, and, well, that changes everything. And so you then perhaps have to look at things all over again. And if you've done a lot of work on a particular plan, then you have another idea, you might have to start again, and that is not something you want. So it's possibly not a time for thinking that you've got all your answers for making firm commitments. That can wait. Maybe over the weekend you'll be in a better position to make commitments, but I not right now, I don't think. And one other thing, other people could be all over the place, because Venus is making a conjunction to Neptune, and Venus is a planet in the Scorpio chart that has a lot to do with other people, because Venus rules Taurus, your opposite sign. So with Venus conjunct Neptune, a lot of people don't know what they're doing. They think they know what they're doing, but they don't really know what they're doing, and they get confused. And additionally, they might say things that they don't mean, and in certain cases they might actually tell deliberate lies. I mean, you shouldn't assume that people are lying. Some people think they're telling the truth, but they're not telling the truth because they simply don't have the knowledge. And so, be sympathetic towards other people's confusion, but don't be too trusting, because someone might tell you something, and they might tell it to you in a way that is very convincing, but when it comes to the crunch, they might have to go back on their words. Or, yeah, it's possible, they might be deliberately lying. So treat other people with a degree of caution, and certainly don't take what they say, or indeed don't take their appearances at face value. Sagittarius. It's another day when you may be feeling a little bit cautious. You know that not everything is straightforward, and how things appear on the surface isn't necessarily how they are in reality. So don't make assumptions. I mean, I'm telling that to a lot of people today. I mean, whoever you are, whatever your sign, it's not a day for making assumptions, for making commitments, for thinking that everything is completely certain. And one reason for that is that there's a conjunction between Venus and Neptune. This Venus and Neptune, it can be a confusing influence, and other people very often they just don't know what they want, and maybe you don't know what you want, and perhaps you feel you're not qualified to know what you want, and that's because you have to ask questions which may not necessarily be answered. And also you can feel that things are getting a little more tense, and the reason for this is that Mars is starting to move towards a semi-square with Jupiter. So this Mars semi-square Jupiter is exact over the weekend. And as you know, if you've been watching my videos, I regard the semi-square aspect, 45 degrees, as being something that is important. And so Mars square Jupiter, Mars might be an aggravating influence. Something is happening that maybe is making you annoyed. Also, what might be making you annoyed is your own realizations. And it is a time, Sagittarius, when you are having realizations about lots of different things, and your mind is certainly active. A lot of people's minds are active at the moment, but your mind is particularly active. And when things happen, your mind starts to think about them. And so your mind is having to constantly adjust to changing circumstances. And it might be a case where you could find yourself actually thinking too much. Some things just happen, and they happen because they happen, and there's nothing to be said about it, and they just happen, and they don't have to be thought about. But you, Sagittarius, might feel that you have to keep thinking about it, and you're trying to work out, what is the solution, and what are you going to do? And it might make matters worse if you do overthink things. And additionally, Sagittarius, what might potentially exacerbate the situation is other people's attitude. Other people are sometimes today going to be rather negative. There is a lot of negativity around you, and some people may be looking at things in the worst possible light. They may not be revealing their negativity, but if you're trying to work out why someone is doing what they're doing, the reason might be that simply that they regard a situation as maybe hopeless, or it's just going nowhere. So why should they put in the effort? And it's important that you're aware of that. Really try to think about people's motivations. Can you do anything about it? You could try. You could try to work out why another person might be feeling negative, and there might be a good reason for it, but it may be that you can do something, say something to make them feel better about themselves. And so that's something that you can do. Do if necessary. It could be difficult, but it may be, Sagittarius, that if you want to make the most of the day, you should just say, well, Venus and Mercury are in Aries, they're in fire signs, and Aries, it's a very creative sign, and so just be happy, be creative, in your own way, enjoy yourself, and don't allow extraneous circumstances and people who are too wrapped up in themselves to get you down. And so that might be the right approach. And and maybe also you shouldn't take yourself too seriously. Capricorn, we have the moon continuing to move through Cancer, and so with the moon moving through Cancer, inevitably there is going to be a certain emphasis on the other person, whoever that other person might be, or just people in general. And you might feel that you're not entirely in control of things, and that's okay. I don't think there's going to be any big problem. I don't think anyone's going to try and make you do anything you don't want to do, and perhaps you should just let people get on with it, and don't be distracted by the things they say, or rather don't take what they say too seriously. The moon is making a square to Mercury, and that moon square Mercury, particularly in the US and in Europe to some extent, that moon square Mercury may be about people saying things which are irritating, or you being tempted to be critical. There's a lot of communication there with that moon square Mercury. And so what do you do about it? Well, you don't have to respond to what people say to you or to what you read. It's not just a spoken word, it's a written word. You don't want to exaggerate. And additionally, you can be careful what you say yourself. Some of the things you say or are tempted to say might seem a bit harsh, and that would particularly be the case if you were being bothered. You were doing something in your own way, in your own space, and someone seems to be intruding, getting in your way, and you might want to say something just comes out. You say something harsh without really thinking about it, and that just doesn't help, and it creates the wrong impression. And if you can be a little more tolerant, I think that would help. And fundamentally, your your social skills at the moment, are pretty good. Your social skills have been pretty good for quite a long time, and I think they continue to be good as you move into the weekend. And of course, with Moon moving through Cancer, that does make you sensitive, or more sensitive than usual, to other people's needs. So there's no need to fall out with anyone, and certain relationships should be okay, should actually prosper in certain cases. So relationships needn't be a problem, but just don't let the verbal side of things spoil things, because they could, particularly if someone is irritated. Aquarius, I don't think there's any reason for it to be a dramatic day. It is another day, like yesterday, when you feel perhaps that there are things that just need to be sorted out, and you don't really want to take on anything new. I mean, you might just feel that you've got enough on your plate, and you just need to, work through what you've got in a fairly systematic way, and that just might be the best approach. And if you try to take on too much or to take on anything new, you might just get annoyed. And in fact, if you look for difficulties, then you will go and find difficulties. So, how would you look for difficulties? If you just even talk to people, it might just seem like a conversation, but a conversation has implications. Someone might say something or present you with some new information, and that is just not what you want to hear. And so that's a reason perhaps for having a day where you are, in the main, doing things on your own according to an existing schedule. And the more people around you, the more people you're talking to, the greater chance that, something else comes up and you have to do more than you bargain for. So it might be, Aquarius, that you should just be trying to keep things simple and not looking for anything dramatic to happen. That's not something that you want to happen. I mean, still, your social skills are pretty good, and you can talk to people about many different things, but just don't talk to them about the important things, things you are doing right now, because if you are making your current activities a subject for discussion, then you could get distracted and undermined, and you might feel that everything is falling apart. But that is, I must emphasize, that is unnecessary. And talking about the social dimension of things, there is a sextile between the moon and the sun. Now this sextile is going to be strongest if you're in Australia or New Zealand. That's when it's exact. If you're in the Americas, it will be fading, but still that moon sextile sun is going to be operational. And with the moon sextile sun, I think you have a chance to get on with people pretty well, provided it's on your terms. It's always got to be on your terms. And if anyone is coming up with information or new ideas, it should be you. Especially if those ideas are practical. You can give advice. No problems about you giving advice. But there is a problem when it comes to you getting advice. Now, that might sound strange. I mean, we should always be looking for advice, shouldn't we? But today, I don't think that advice will be of much benefit to you. I don't think it'll be of any benefit to you at all. And you could say that the main aspect today is a conjunction between Venus and Neptune. And, this Venus and Neptune, all of us are going to be impacted by it. But as far as, you are concerned, this conjunction may be about how you present yourself and what you say. And I've tried to suggest that it's you who should be initiating the subject matter of any conversation. You don't want to be the recipient of someone else's material. And so you're able to lead conversations in a way of your choosing. And so you make sure that it's always up to you, and you can move from one subject to another very easily. And so if you find yourself talking about something that you don't want to talk about, I think with this Venus conjunct Neptune, you're going to be very good at changing the subject in a very sort of natural and organic way, because you don't want to get to the point, at least the point as another person sees it. And so it may actually be to your advantage to distract. And you have to think about your own particular circumstances, but yeah, it's not a good day for you to be told what to do. And remember that Mars opposition Pluto is still there. Pluto is still in Aquarius. Obviously it's going to be in Aquarius for the next few decades, isn't it? Until the 2040s. But Mars is less than 3 degrees away from Pluto, and that Mars-Pluto aspect is about power. And it could be that some people are continuing to probe your defenses, and that's why when you're talking to people, you need to be on your guard, and you want to make sure that things move in your way, and you certainly don't want anyone taking control of the conversation. That would not be a good thing, I don't think, today. Pisces, it's looks like being a reasonably good day. The moon still is in Cancer, and with the moon in Cancer making a sextile to the sun, I think that you're feeling pretty good. You're feeling happy about yourself and where you're going, and you don't really want to take things too seriously. And you shouldn't. You should just go with the flow, and don't feel that there's anything that you have to do. And this can be reflected in your activities, whether it's your conversations or your traveling, short distance traveling. You go from place to place in a very sort of casual way, and you get some variety that way. I mean, you don't want to be stuck in any one place, particularly if it's not a place of your choosing. So, do keep going, keep moving, and probably not a good idea to spend too long talking to any one person. And the reason for that is that there is a square aspect between the Moon and Mercury, and so that Moon Mercury is about conversation. It's about what people are talking about, and Moon square Mercury might be about a conversation that you don't really feel comfortable with, a conversation going in a direction you're not happy about. And so the longer a conversation goes on for, the more of a problem it could become. So you can have today lots of little conversations, but you don't want to have long conversations, because conversations could really mess things up for you. And additionally, although today looks as if it can be quite easy, you shouldn't forget that Mars and Jupiter are starting to move towards a 45-degree aspect, and Jupiter is your ruler, and Mars can be an irritating influence. And this aspect, I think it's exact over the weekend, so you may not have to worry about it today, but it's building up, and it may be that you're trying to enjoy your own company and it's all going well, but then Mars semi-square Jupiter, there's an irritation, and the irritation may get stronger as you move into the weekend. And this irritation might be someone doing something you weren't expecting, or something cropping up that you weren't expecting. You hadn't considered it. And suddenly everything has to change. And you have to accommodate something. And perhaps you should just leave it for as long as possible. Maybe you can stave it off through Friday, but maybe end of Friday and into the weekend, you may not have a choice. You may have to act. And one of the distracting influences today, might be your own thoughts. Your thoughts are very active. A lot of people have very active thoughts at the moment. There's a lot of thinking, and it's not just a Pisces thing. Everyone is thinking. And your own thinking could start to lead you in a new direction. And although this new direction, I think, is very much a good thing, it may be just something that you're not fully prepared for, and you might not like the disruption of having ideas. Yeah, we always say that ideas are good, but ideas, they can be disruptive, because you might have an idea and it casts doubt on everything you're doing, everything you're planning, everything you're working on. So be ready for that. But, if you do have the right idea, you can't just ignore it. Ideas are there for a reason. And now I want to look at Friday from a perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 12, which is standstill. Now, that doesn't sound great. And, regardless of what I've been saying, astrologically, and I've been talking about Venus conjunct Neptune and moon sextile Sun, moon square Mercury, a bit of activity there. Regardless of what I've been saying, it may be a day when it feels that everything grinds to a halt. Now, it could just be that it's the end of a week and that there's nothing more to be done. But perhaps if you'd been expecting progress, at first you might feel that just nothing is happening, and it may be that other people are completely uncooperative and that your own efforts just don't seem to be going anywhere. And additionally, there may be something a little bit unfair about it. It seems that the people who know the least who are perhaps the least trustworthy are the ones who are able to make progress, and that could be frustrating. It's one of those situations when I Ching is talking about inferior people and what inferior people are doing. The inferior people are the ones who are not in a state of standstill. They're the ones moving, and you're just stuck here. And that might be bothering you. But that is a temporary situation. It's not going to last forever. We do have moving lines. And the fourth line moves as well. And the fourth line can be about a calling. That even if things are really stuck, you have a knowledge that you should be doing something. There's something that you should be working on, even if the odds seem to be stacked against you. So with that fourth line moving, then you can get in touch with the right people, and you will have a belief in yourself, even if externally everything is stuck. And then the top line moves. And with the top line moving, it's indicating that after a long sort of period of frustration, and remember with this frustration, we've also got Mercury semi-square the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and Mercury Mars-Saturn square Mars-Saturn is about negativity, feeling that things really aren't right. Things just aren't moving, and seeing things, in the worst possible light. And so we're feeling a bit negative about things. But then the last line moves, and the last line moves, and that's indicating that the period of standstill is finally coming to an end, that things are moving. And one way in which this standstill can be resolved is potentially with a little bit of conflict. It's possible that the people who have been allowing this standstill to persist need to be challenged. Maybe you need to be challenged. You need to challenge yourself. And so with conflict, the right kind of conflict is very constructive conflict. You know that something has to be said, something has to be done. The standstill can be broken, and that allows us to move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram that moves to is hexagram 29, which is the abysmal. Sounds bad, but the abysmal needn't be bad. And it's really saying something about what we should be doing once the standstill is broken, once we're able to start making progress. And the abysmal is about water. There are different aspects of water in the I Ching. One aspect of water, I think it's the hexagram number, hexagram 58, for example, the lake, which is the lake over lake. So that's one aspect of water, the lake. And another aspect of water is the abyss, going down into the depths. And this is maybe what this is about. But there are no moving lines in this because it is a second line, because it is a second hexagram. And it's the moving lines very often where the problems are. And what the abysmal is about certainly a dangerous situation, but it's about a dangerous situation we understand, and we've been through it before, and we know what to do. And if we just trust ourselves to get it right, and we just follow the natural course of things, we'll be able to negotiate the obstacles. We won't fall into the abyss, and we'll come out the other side unscathed. So what we're dealing with today overall is a period of standstill, but things just really aren't moving. We do make slow progress. Maybe we have to, in the end, create a conflict situation. We have to perhaps speak our mind. That unblocks things. And then we move to apparently clear ground. We start making progress, but it's not entirely clear ground. There are major pitfalls here. Things could go wrong if we're not careful, but they needn't go wrong if we trust ourselves and we tread carefully and we remember mistakes we've made in the past. We should be okay. And finally, I want to look at the horoscope of Nigel Farage. I do look at Nigel Farage's horoscope every now and then. I think Nigel Farage is an important person. He is certainly important in terms of British politics. Many are saying that one day he will be Prime Minister. I'm not going to comment on that. And this is at a very early stage of an electoral cycle, because Labour won the election in last year in 2024, and they don't have to have another election until 2029, and so they've been in power for less than a year. And usually in politics, it's all about the economy. And so if Labour can turn around the economy, then they should be okay. They could win the next election. So we don't really know anything. Will they turn around the economy? Well, probably not. But still, it is early days. But according to sort of opinion polls, Nigel Farage is the most popular, or at least the least unpopular major politician in the UK. And his party, Reform, which is a right-wing party, it is not a far right-wing party. I mean, I think the term far right is used far too much. It's arguably is just a conservative party. You could argue that, but more right-wing from the existing Conservative Party. You know, like in America, people talk about the Uniparty in Britain quite a lot. The Conservatives and the Labour Party are just all the same, and so there have been elections. I don't know the results of the May the 1st elections, even though this video is for May the 2nd. I'm making this recording on Thursday morning, so I don't know the results. But he's in the news, so it's a good opportunity to talk about Nigel Farage. And so, just a few points about his horoscope and what I think are the features that we should really look for look at in Nigel Farage's horoscope. And I think it's very important that Nigel Farage is an Aries with no air in his chart. And air can be a problem. You probably, if you've been watching his videos and you look at some of the flaws, if you've been watching my videos with a critical eye, you will have perhaps noticed that I'm perhaps too much of a Gemini. I've got the Sun in Gemini, I've got Mercury in Gemini. I think about things quite a lot. I ponder things. I can be a little bit indecisive in terms of how I speak, and I don't really go in for certainties, and I like to hedge my bets, and maybe that doesn't help my oratorial performance. And so with Nigel Farage, he has no planets in air. He doesn't have to think about things. He doesn't have to worry too much about things. He's got all his answers. And I must emphasize that people who have no air, Emmanuel Macron has no air. People who have no air can be very, very intelligent. Although I wouldn't have described Nigel Farage as an intellectual, that's not his approach. I mean, I think Emmanuel Macron, you could certainly describe him as an intellectual. Whatever you think of him. Emmanuel Macron, well, he might have outer planets in air signs, but he doesn't have any personal traditional planets in air signs. So that kind of helps him, Nigel Farage, in terms of the way he communicates. And he's got 3 planets in Aries. And so Aries is a fire sign. It just knows when it works well. Aries just knows. He just knows what he knows. He's got all the connections. He's absolutely 100% sure he's right. And if you're a politician, that really helps. And if you're a politician in the UK, I think people, if you've got your sun in Aries, you tend to do well in England, in the UK. Northwest Europe, from a Ptolemaic view, is a fiery part of the world, and so if you've got the sun in Aries, you tend to prosper. All things being equal, and so his sun in Aries. You look at his, whatever you think of him, his speaking abilities, his oratorial abilities. He's someone who can speak without notes. He just says it. He can just say what he thinks, and he can entertain his audience, and that does give him real power. And there are other things going on in his chart. He was born in the mid-60s. He's got Uranus and Pluto on the ascendant, Uranus Pluto rising. So that really says something about how he presents himself. And Uranus Pluto conjunction, it is about the expression of freedom. We want freedom, and that's a mid-60s concept. And it's opposition Chiron, and it's right across his ascendant. And wanting to be free of the European Union is, of course, a major theme, or perhaps the theme, of his political life. And that's what made his career. And, additionally, there is, a softer side to his chart. He does have, he does have Venus relatively close to the midheaven. I think it's a planet of maximum elevation, and Venus in Taurus is in its exaltation. So that is a good Venus. Now you could say Venus is in the last degree of Taurus, and I know when I look at the comments to this channel, people often think that the last degree is somehow unfortunate, isn't necessarily working very well. Well, that is possible, but Venus quite close to the midheaven, I think, is really helping him project himself to a wider audience. And yeah, it's Venus. Venus is in its own sign. Did I say Venus was exalted in Taurus? It's the moon that's exalted in Taurus. Venus is in its own sign in Taurus. So Venus in its own sign in Taurus is strongly placed. So, those are a few thoughts about his natal chart. And right now, he just turned 60. He turned 60 last year in 2024, and over the last week, I've been sort of pointing out, what happens to politicians when they turn 60. So we saw, with Kamala Harris, the presidential elections were just after she turned 60, and that was obviously a real disaster for her. And there were particular reasons, and that because, at 60, that's when your perfected ascendant returns to where it was at the time of birth. So if Kamala Harris had Gemini rising, so at 60 being a multiple of 12, again, Gemini was rising, and so her Gemini becomes prominent. And with Mark Carney, who's just been elected, he turned 60, I think, in March, and so for him, 60 was great. And Jupiter, because he has this wonderful Jupiter rising in Taurus, and so at 60, again, the ascendant returned to Taurus, and Taurus, Jupiter rising, Jupiter in Taurus in mutual reception to Venus in Pisces. So he had a great ascendant. Now, Nigel Farage has actually just turned 61, and so that period when he was 60, between April 2024 and April 2025, was I would have said pretty good. I mean, he fought the general election when he was 60. Reform, it's very, very difficult in the British electoral system to get members of parliament, but he did get some members of parliament for reform, and he really established reform as a potential, insurgent party, and he became talked of as a potential prime minister. So from a political perspective, the year following his 60th birthday was, I would have said, very, very dramatic, and it was, I think, pretty fortunate. But he's just turned 61, and so that is going to create a change. And and I think that we can see his 61st the year after his 61st birthday, because in a rather mixed way. So when he was 61, when he turned 61 on April the 3rd, he sort of moved into the ascendant switched to Libra. Now, he does have Mars, Sun, and Jupiter in Aries. And so the Mars, Sun, and Jupiter are making an opposition aspect to Libra. Now, that opposition, they may start to become important over the next year. It's not necessarily going to be a completely easy year. There's going to be a lot of aggravation and a lot of conflict around him. And we've already seen that there are potential splits amongst some of his supporters. People have left the Reform Party. He's had an argument with one of his members of Parliament, and he left. quite an acrimonious argument. I don't really know the full details. That actually happened before his 61st birthday. And there are other people talking about setting up rival parties. So it's not going to be without conflict. But that doesn't mean to say that it's going to be a bad year. I think it's just a year that there's a lot for him to deal with. And I think this Sun, Mars, Jupiter opposition, I think Margaret Thatcher experienced a similar thing when she became Prime Minister. I should maybe do a comparison in a later video, but I'm not going to put up Margaret Thatcher's chart. That's all a bit of a distraction. And so his annual ruler is now Venus, and so Venus may be in the last degree of Taurus, but it is in Taurus. It is in its own sign, and so that is not so bad. So from a perfection perspective, I would have said that this year is going to be quite mixed for him, and as far as transits are concerned, Uranus is approaching the conjunction to Venus. Now that conjunction to Venus, which takes place, that takes place in June, I think, at the end of June. Now that could be an important aspect, and he'll get it again. He will get that again at the end of the year. So the question is, how is that Uranus conjunct his Venus going to manifest? And it just might be important simply because Venus is his annual ruler now that he's turned 61. So this emphasizes the point that it's going to be a year still, I think, of ups and downs. And that is very much the nature of Nigel Farage's life. He does have ups and downs. He has had one election. I think he had a plane crash, or he was in a light plane, and he had a crash just before the election, and he came out of this crash rather battered, but I mean he survived. And then you can see that the tensions are building up with Nigel Farage when you actually look at his solar arc directions. So here are his solar arc directions, and if we see what is being directed. So one thing that Farage has in his chart, he has Uranus square the midheaven, and Uranus square the midheaven can make someone attract heavy events, and it can make someone quite assertive and perhaps a little bit aggressive. With Uranus square the midheaven, but he is a disruptor, and the midheaven represents him, where he's going to, where he feels he's going to, and Uranus it's always difficult, and it's never easy, and his solar arc directed Mars is starting to make a conjunction to the midheaven. So in other words, solar arc directed Mars is 3-something Gemini. So in 2 or 3 years, Mars will get to the conjunction of the midheaven and then to the square of Uranus. And so that will coincide roughly with the time of the next election. And the question is, what kind of orb do you use for solar arc directions? Probably he's starting to pick up on it now, Mars moving towards his midheaven. It's becoming a little more angry, and he has to be very careful increasingly with splits within his party. He is very much the leader, and perhaps he doesn't take kindly to people contradicting him, and it can lead to splits. I mean, this inevitably happens or very often happens when you've got strong personalities, it often happens on the fringes of politics. I'm not saying that Reform is a fringe party anymore. I don't regard them, certainly don't regard them as a far-right party, but when you're in that kind of situation, splits can be difficult, and splits can just happen, and splits can stop people getting into power. And so that may be an issue that he's having to deal with, but you don't have to be an astrologer to say that. I mean, that's quite obvious from reading the news. And so those are a few thoughts about his Western chart. I additionally wanted to look at his Vedic chart, and I think that his Vedic chart perhaps gives us better information in a way. And so here is Nigel Farage's Vedic chart. Here it is. And when I say better information, I mean information that is more sort of clear-cut. With Western astrology, one can say, well, it's like this and it's like that, and we're not quite sure which way it's going to go. Though with Vedic astrology, of course, it's much easier to get it completely wrong. So here is Nigel Farage's Vedic chart. Now, a few points about this Vedic chart is, firstly, Nigel Farage has Kala Sarpa Yoga, and there's Rahu and Ketu. Now, the definition of Kala Sarpa Yoga, don't forget, is when all of the planets are on one side of the nodal axis. So Varius is ascendant in Leo. Of course, I know he's got Virgo rising in the west, but Leo in the east. And so technically, he doesn't have Kala Sarpa Yoga because the moon is actually on the other side of his nodal axis. But the moon is in the same house as Ketu. And so we have the 5 empty houses, and just looking at how other Vedic astrologers work. I mean, I don't regard myself as a Vedic astrologer, so I won't say other, but Vedic astrologers, for example, have said that Nehru has Kala Sarpa Yoga. Technically, according to the definition I've just given, Nehru did not have Kala Sarpa Yoga. So, because the moon and the Ketu are in the same sign, I would regard Nigel Farage as having Kala Sarpa Yoga. And so with Nigel Farage, there's something incredibly fated about the whole thing. And things just happen in Nigel Farage's life. And he is someone who does at some level seem to have a great calling. He feels he has a purpose. And so I think that he is illustrating Kala Sarpa Yoga. And, people with Kala Sarpa Yoga can, do great things. Abraham Lincoln had Kala Sarpa Yoga, and Nehru, one of the founders of Indian independence, had Kala Sarpa Yoga. And of course, Nigel Farage would probably quite like that analogy because he's talking about British independence from Europe. So that might be a link there. And so, he's got Kala Sarpa Yoga. That's the first point. Second point is he has got Dik Bala. So Dik Bala is directional strength, and different planets have Dik Bala in different houses. Saturn has a Dik Bala in the 7th house. So he indeed has got a Dik Bala, and he's got Saturn in sidereal Aquarius in the 7th. And when you have Dik Bala, when you've got someone with Dik Bala, they have this incredible ability to be able to deal with their enemies, because the 7th house is about enemies. And people with Dik Bala are really hard people to defeat. And an example of a British politician who had Dik Bala was Nicola Sturgeon, who used to be the First Minister of Scotland. And I remember I used to do blog posts about her, every now and then, predicting that she was about to fall, and she just stayed in power forever, even though things really appeared to be going against her, but almost ever. And she had Dik Bala, And even though I think her Saturn was in sidereal Aries, which was in its fall, and so I mean I think she was a real example of someone who really stuck at it and was able to benefit from Dikbala. And so Farage with his Saturn in the seventh, he is really strengthened by that. And people thinking that they can beat him, get the better of him, well, they better know what they're doing. And additionally, he has Venus in Taurus, one of the strongest planets in his chart. The strongest planet in his chart by the Shadbala which is the sixfold strength. Don't ask me to tell you how that's calculated. It's pretty complicated. I just let the software do the work for that. Saturn is the strongest planet in his chart by Shadbala, and then Venus is the second strongest, being in Taurus in his 10th house. So it is quite a powerful chart. And then we have to consider, what's happening now and what his dasha is. So in 2012, Nigel Farage entered his Rahu dasha, the North Node, and this dasha finishes in August 2030. And, so far in this dasha, Farage has been pretty successful. He helped coordinate the referendum on Brexit, and Britain voted for Brexit. After the 2019 election, it appeared that he was going to disappear. And then he realized that the Tories, as far as he was concerned, had betrayed him. They betrayed their trust in terms of, particularly in terms of immigration. And he felt he had to come back into politics. And so he got back into politics. He created a party in after many attempts to get into Parliament. He got into Parliament. The Reform got other representation. I don't know, they got 5 seats, or I think it was 5 seats. Was it 6, 5 or 6, something like that? So that was a success. So this Rahu Dasha is still in operation. Now his Rahu is strong. His Rahu is in Gemini. Rahu is I think it's exalted in Gemini. Rahu works very well in the Mercury-ruled signs of Gemini and Virgo. So he's got Rahu in Gemini. He's got Rahu in the 11th house. So the 11th house is an Upachaya house. It's a growth house, and malefics work well in the 11th. And so Rahu is a malefic. It's in Gemini. It's in the 11th. So it is a really strong Rahu. And so with this Rahu, persisting from Rahu Dasha, continuing from 2012 through to 2030, things are likely to continue to work well for him on and off. Certainly between now and, certainly in terms of Britain, the next election cycle, so 2030, that will be after the next election. So he's going through a really good phase of his life. And then we look at the subdashas. So the subdashas give us an added picture. And so from February the 25th, 2024 until February the 25th, 2027, he is in his Venus subdasha. And so for the next 18 months, he will continue to be in his Venus subdasha. So Rahu major dasha, Venus subdasha. And of course, his Venus is incredibly strong. It's in Taurus. It's in the 10th house. But from Shadbala perspective, it's the second strongest planet in his chart. So that may indicate that Farage will continue to be on a roll. Now, 2027, he moves into his Sun dasha, and Sun subdasha, Rahu major dasha, and the Sun subdasha. Now, it's true that the Sun is 10th house from Rahu, so that might be good, but The Sun is in his 8th house. The Sun is it's conjunct Mars. So I don't know about that. That certainly needs some more thought. But certainly over the next couple of years, things do look good for him. And remember what I was looking when I was looking at Western astrology. I said that in a couple of years' time, Mars moves on to his midheaven. Mars starts to square his Uranus. So it may be that 2027 is a time where things may become a little bit difficult for him. But still, the main dasha he's in is Rahu, and that does continue until 2030. And then there's a few words about his transits. So he's got Saturn. Saturn has just left his 7th house and it's moved into his 8th house. And I mean, from a Vedic perspective, remember, Saturn has just gone into the sidereal 12, but we also have Jupiter. Jupiter's currently moving through sidereal Taurus, and so, in other words, currently he's got transiting Jupiter in his Vedic chart, moving through his 10th house, and you can see how he's gained the benefits from this, because he's got Venus in the 10th. And he's been successful politically while transiting Vedic Jupiter has been moving through his 10th. And then at the end of this month, Jupiter changes sign. So Jupiter hits, well, in Western astrology, it hits 24 Gemini, but that means that at the end of this month, we convert that to sidereal. Sidereally, Jupiter goes into Gemini at the end of the month. So in other words, it goes into his 11th house. And he may benefit from that even more because he's in his Rahu Dasha. And he's got Rahu in Gemini. And so Jupiter is about to move into Gemini. And so by the end of the month, things may get even better for him. And then you've got, over the next few months, I think into next year, Jupiter will be moving through sidereal Gemini. I think so. I think it stays there. So short term, certainly over the next couple of years, I do think that things are probably looking pretty good for Nigel Farage, and somehow he'll manage the splits. And with that Saturn having Dikbala, there will be times when things look bad for him, when people will start to write him off, and when he might slip in the polls. But somehow he's always coming back, and he's on a roll. And you shouldn't forget, he's got Kalasarpa Yoga. He's got something to do. He's on a mission. Now, you might not like Farage, you might not like his mission, but it's not about like and dislike, is it? I mean, the universe has got a plan, and Farage seems to be very much part of it. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the subject of Farage. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.